The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. And we say hello to Sarah Lipton Lubet, Executive Director of Take Back the Court Action Fund. Sarah Lipton Lubet, thanks so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, and the pleasure is certainly ours. And the mission of your organization, as stated on your website, is to educate the public about the viability of expanding the Supreme Court. First, as your organization envisions it, what does court expansion mean?
I'm so glad to have the opportunity to talk with you about this. Court expansion is really simple. It means adding 4 seats to the Supreme Court so that conservative extremists no longer have a stranglehold on the future of our country. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Now, we'll do this in a couple of parts. What's the reason for expanding the Supreme Court?
Look, we need to expand the court, number 1, to save our democracy, and number 2, to safeguard our fundamental rights. So we're talking about like pretty essential stuff here. After years of Republican maneuvering, from Mitch McConnell refusing to grant a hearing to Merrick Garland, to rushing through Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation with an election already underway, the Supreme Court is now packed with right-wing conservative extremist justices. And they've really become an active player in the right-wing agenda to undermine our most fundamental rights and really rig our political system. You know, it can be hard to come to terms with for folks that have kind of come up with an understanding of the Supreme Court as an ideal version of itself, but we really can't look away from the reality of what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, the trickier question here is, what is the process for expanding the Supreme Court?
Well, it's actually not tricky, and that's what I really want folks to understand. All it takes is a piece of legislation just like any other, right? Congress passes it, the president signs it. That's no small feat these days in terms of getting legislation through Congress. But it really is just like any other important issue that folks work on. It's been done multiple times before. The Supreme Court, it just isn't this mystical entity that it is sometimes held out to be, right? That exists like totally outside of our politics. It is well within Congress's authority and, frankly, their responsibility to act on this.
But that's the tricky part, getting Congress to actually act. I mean, it's been difficult even with the simplest of legislation lately. This one seems to be, and maybe, I don't know why it would be, other than the Republicans don't want to give the Democrats any sort of advantage, of course, but how are they going to be able to push this through? How do you get enough support?
Look, what I can tell you is that the Supreme Court isn't waiting patiently on the sidelines for policymakers to take years to figure this out, right? It is hard at work right now, imposing its hard right ideology on the rest of us. In just the last few months alone, just the last few months, the Supreme Court has gutted the Voting Rights Act, effectively ended Roe v. Wade in Texas, blocked the pandemic eviction moratorium, forced the administration to reinstitute Donald Trump's cruel Remain in Mexico policy, curtailed existing rights of workers to organize, discriminated against LGBTQ families, and ruled in favor of a Koch front group to undermine transparency and enable dark money in our politics. That's just a few months. So, the need is clear. It becomes clearer every day, and we have to summon the will to act.
Mm-hmm. Now, on your website, you address a number of concerns that folks have about this idea. First, even if the court is expanded, isn't it possible that Republicans could engage in the same kind of court packing that goes on today, in the future?
Look, Republicans have already done it. They changed the size of the court when they refused to even give Merrick Garland a hearing. And they've promised the same treatment to whomever Joe Biden puts forward should they be back in the majority. So in the face of that, we can't sit here and do nothing, right? Republicans have created a mess of the federal judiciary, and the need to expand the Supreme Court is a direct result of actions that they've already taken. We need to act to protect our democracy, to protect the right to vote, to protect abortion access, to protect workers' rights, to protect our climate. Everything we care about is on the line. And frankly, if we end up toggling back and forth between Republicans stealing the court and Democrats unstealing it, then we're better off than if we just allow Republicans to break all the rules and govern through minority rule forever.
That's a good point. Another concern is that expansion could undermine the court's legitimacy. This one I don't really agree with, but what's your response?
What legitimacy? Right? The court's approval rating is in free fall. The majority of the public already understands the court's actions to be motivated by politics, not law, and all the more so after its egregious actions in the Texas abortion ban case. A Supreme Court that's already perceived as partial, partisan, unfair, it's lost legitimacy in the eyes of the American people, and so can't fulfill its job of delivering equal justice under the law, right? That's what it's supposed to do. Expanding the court in these circumstances would actually rebuild public trust and restore legitimacy.
We're speaking to Sarah Lipton Lubet, Executive Director of Take Back the Court Action Fund. And Sarah, there was a bill introduced in April that would expand the court to 13 members, and you'd mentioned that number before, of course. It's called the Judiciary Act. What's the status of the bill now, and what kind of support does it actually have on Capitol Hill?
The Judiciary Act is gaining support every day. It was introduced in the spring, as you said, following just a remarkable surge in support for court expansion in the wake of the GOP decision to rush Barrett onto the court just a week before the election. And in the 2 months since the court has allowed the Texas abortion ban to take effect, and I keep talking about this decision and the Texas abortion ban case because it is both so pivotal for the lives of so many people in Texas and so indicative of what this off-the-rails court is about. In the 2 months since the court has allowed that abortion ban to take effect, we've seen incredible momentum for expansion, fueled by, as I mentioned, these all-time high public disapproval ratings and a growing understanding of just how extreme this court is. So there are now more than 40 members of Congress on the Judiciary Act, which honestly, I think would have been unthinkable even a year ago.
Yeah. Beyond Capitol Hill, though, where do you see support for expanding the court, and what's driving that support?
When Take Back the Court started working on this issue 3 years ago, there were 0 other groups supporting it. 0. Today, there are more than 90, including the SEIU, one of the nation's most influential labor unions, which just came out recently, announced its support. Just the other week, Take Back the Court held a rally on the Supreme Court steps featuring senators, representatives, advocates. It was joined virtually by tens of thousands of people across the country. So this movement is growing. It is growing at breakneck speed, really. And the Supreme Court, with each disastrous retrograde decision, and there are more coming, makes the need more and more clear every day.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, before we let you go, your advocacy work isn't limited to the Supreme Court. What's your position on the lower federal courts?
We've got a lot of work to do on our courts. That's number one. There's an urgent need for Congress to expand the lower courts as well. When you take a look at Republican obstructionism, the Senate prevented President Obama from filling more than 100 open seats when he was in office, allowing President Trump to come in and fill hundreds of vacancies. All told, Trump, who lost the popular vote, put 3 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, more than 50 on the U.S. Court of Appeals, and nearly 200 on district courts in just one term. Really remade the face of the federal judiciary. And moreover, Congress has really so far failed to respond to the overloaded federal courts, right? Resulting in a system that delays justice, denies justice. It's been something like 30 years since Congress created new judgeships and the appeals courts and the district courts. Caseloads have continued to grow. Our country has continued to grow. And there's really an urgent need to expand the lower courts to meet that growing need. Too few judges means too little justice.
Mm-hmm. Sarah Lipton Lubet, Executive Director of Take Back the Court Action Fund, joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast. Sarah, we really appreciate your time with us today. We'd love to have you back again soon.
Thanks so much. I can't wait.
Thank you. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
'Tis the season, right? Traditionally, this time of year celebrates spirituality and festivities, including Hanukkah, Christmas, and Kwanzaa. In modern-day America, however, the winter solstice signals the faithful to gather from afar in monumental temples to worship our nation's supreme secular deity, big-time sports. Get ready for a nonstop frenzy of football, basketball, soccer, and more, with devout fans making travel pilgrimages to their sacred stadiums and arenas. But whatever the sport, the name of the game these days is the same, M-O-N-E-Y. For the people's sports franchises are firmly in the grip of a self-regulating handful of secretive, uber-rich, autocratic corporate owners. We might worship the team that actually plays the sport, but our money mostly goes to this ruling clique of billionaire barons. Consider those gargantuan houses of worship where the games are played. We the people, including non-worshippers, paid for nearly all of them with our tax dollars, usually with no chance to vote on the giveaway. Yet, a few dozen profiteering team owners are given control of the venues. They set and collect the outrageous ticket prices and are even allowed to gouge the faithful by charging $15 for one small beer. Most insulting, these rich public welfare moochers pocket millions of extra dollars a year by turning these huge edifices, even those built with the people's money, into private billboards by selling off the so-called naming rights to the highest corporate bidders. Thus, dozens of our major sports facilities don't honor the cities they're in, the citizenry, or even the team. Instead, they're gaudily plastered with brand names like FedEx Field, Minute Maid Park, RCA Dome, and Toyota Center, as though they're corporate-owned. This is Jim Hightower saying the money game is yet another corporate swindle, using America's sporting spirit for private greed.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This social security security measure.
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.
Americans say that even more than climate change or immigration or education or crime, that the economy is what they really care about. So let me just ask you to start off generally, overall, looking at the economy today, how would you rate the state of the economy today, given all the indicators that you look at?
Well, I kind of get while people are mixed up on things, because there is a whole bunch of inconsistent data out there, right? If you look at the numbers, unemployment is low, but there's all kinds of people who are out of work or are still seeking work or can't find the kind of work that makes sense for them because they still have to figure out how to deal with their kids or other things. Interest rates are low. Housing is going crazy, but because housing is going crazy, nobody can afford housing. People have all this money, right, that they got from stimulus and other things, but it's hard to get things to be able to buy because of the supply chain problems and other things. So I think the economy is really confusing. I don't know if the economy is great or is looking forward to trouble or what. So I get why people have this angst, yet the data sort of suggests that everything should be okay. Of course, we just came through a pandemic, where we had record numbers of unemployment, and people, of course, are feeling angst and a number of other things. But I do think things are headed in the right direction. We're just still reorganizing everything to get us back in place. I think what the Biden administration is trying to do by making sure that we have ongoing stimulus happening through the infrastructure bill and the other kinds of things sets the economy up for a good future. But we're still in just a state of reorganization right now.
Right. So, do you think we're on track to a full recovery despite some of these bumps in the road you indicate?
I think we are. Of course, over the weekend, we got this news about this new coronavirus variant, which could just throw a real problem in everything if it's not handled well, or the disease ends up being resistant to, the vaccine or something like that. But I do think we're headed in the right direction. I think people have done a good job of taking the first steps to unstick the ports and to get our supply chain issues taken care of. I do think people are finding work. I do think wages are going up. Unfortunately, prices are going up too. But if we can keep prices in check here, I think we are on the road to a good recovery. But let's remember, Bill, we had like a giant, thing thrown at us with this pandemic that completely disoriented everything. And when you take the economy and have such a shock like that, it's actually remarkable we've recovered as quickly as we have. And it's going to take a little while to make sure that that's sustained. But I think we're doing the right things. And if Congress and the Senate in particular can get their act together and we can get this stimulus bill, really passed, I think we're set up at least, for the potential to have a prosperous couple of years in the near future.
Right. I want to ask you in a little bit both about the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill. But back to one of the indicators, 638,000 new jobs in October.
Yeah.
Good sign, right?
Some states seeing, historic lows in unemployment, actually.
And the market, despite the pandemic, despite all these issues you raised, the market just seems to be almost living in a world of its own. My friend Jim Glassman, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, wrote the book Dow 30,000, and everybody laughed at him, right? Well, he finally made it.
he blew right past it. It seems to, I agree. It seems to have a market of its own. I guess if, to take conventional wisdom, if it's just that there's no place to get a good return other than to take some riskier investments. Treasury bonds have been at all-time lows. Foreign bonds have been at all-time lows. Corporate borrowing is at all-time lows. So people are trying to find some yield and maybe putting it into the stock market at absolutely ridiculous and kind of high rates of return. And Bill, by the way, if you look at sort of what happens just before the market, record year for the number of initial public offerings that are happening, new companies going to market with market capitalizations beyond classic American companies. Tesla's got a higher capitalization than GM, Ford, and Chrysler put together.
Yeah.
New neobanks coming online that are worth more than JP Morgan Chase. It's kind of crazy. Companies that have never been profitable with billion-dollar market valuations. It feels a little frothy right now, to say the least.
How important is how serious maybe is the supply chain management issue?
Well, I think people didn't figure it out quite right. People had all this money, and the economy had been shifting to such a service sector economy. And I think when people thought the economy would bounce back, people would go to restaurants, they'd go to movies, they'd go to sports events. They have started to do those things, but not the kinds of numbers that they were pre-pandemic yet.
Mm-hmm.
And people, substituted it by buying goods because they were sitting at home all the time. And I think that had not been figured out. And so there's just not enough of those things. My wife and I, over the summer, contemplated buying a piece of land up in New England to buy a house. And, we were told, you could buy a piece of land, which was at an inflated price, but we can't start your house until late in 2023 because there's not materials. There's so much demand and
wow.
all these things. So you start to spread that through all the economy, and inevitably it's going to lead to price increases. We really have to get this unstuck so that there's more goods in the flow of things, so that people can buy them. I think it's good news that some of the major retailers have come out and said that they'll have enough, the things that people want to buy for Christmas time.
But it's also a global problem, which we cannot, we don't totally control ourselves, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the pandemic hit every country in the world just about, including countries that are major producers now. And we became a global economy over the last 30 years and are wholly dependent on other countries. Kind of scary, right? That we gave up so much of our manufacturing capacity, not just to be able to make sure everybody can get a washing machine and a refrigerator and lumber and those other things, but we gave up that manufacturing capacity and didn't have the ability to have the materials that we needed to respond to the pandemic. So we were in complete hock to other countries for that personal protective equipment or the materials needed to deliver the vaccine. Things really pretty critical to our national security. Lord knows, right, what we're dependent on now, where we are completely dependent on other countries, right, for not only sourcing materials, but the production of all the electronics and technology that we need today. We really have to figure out, again, how to sort of reinvest in American manufacturing.
I was thinking while you were talking about the housing, your experience to build a house in New England, people trying to buy a new car today, right? Can't get the car. Try renting a car today and figure out how much you're going to pay for it because the rental supply is so low.
Or used cars. The used car is crazy. I'll just give you my own personal experience. I went and wanted to buy a new car, and we went to the lot, and the dealership for the model and make that we're looking at only had one of those cars on the lot. And so we looked at the used cars, and that was fine. We got one, and then I said, "Hey, just out of curiosity, what's the price differential between the used car and which was a little over a year old, had 15,000 miles on it or something, a couple of years gone on the warranty, versus a new model?" Bill, it was $300 more to get the new car because the demand for used cars is so crazy. I've never experienced anything like that before.
By the way, you and I are both showing our age, perhaps because, of course, we call them now previously owned cars.
Oh, that's true. Of course.
So we no longer call them used cars. All right. Inflation. It's all over the news. That's all they're talking about. Inflation. How bad is it? 6.2%, by the way, for October. I know you know the number, but just to throw it out there, the highest since 1990.
It's bad right now. I think the question is, will it sustain, or will some of the, so will the supply chain catch up, and will there be enough supply, and will some of those price increases moderate over time? I can't predict that, any more than anybody else can. But the unfortunate thing about it is, for the first time in so long, workers actually have bargaining power, whether they have bargaining power through a traditional union contract or just because they have power in the marketplace. I mean, you could go everywhere now and you can see help wanted signs everywhere that the price is going up. I know one guy who owns a chain of restaurants here in the DC area where both you and I are, who one night at his flagship store in Georgetown had a rival restaurateur walk in, offer everybody $5 an hour raise if they would quit their job and walk over and close at the restaurant. So there's real bargaining power now for workers. But unfortunately, if it all gets wiped away because of price increases, we have lost, the first time, to go back to what you started with, which is angst about the economy. We have lost the first time where workers could have actually began to catch up a little bit to some of the buying power that they've lost over the years.
But, I keep trying to figure out, how bad is it? There's a lot of talk about the price of milk, a gallon price of milk, which is about $3.50 average. I looked it up this morning. So I guess in the real life that people shopping for groceries or whatever, how bad is it?
It's any individual items, not that bad, but it's when it goes across the board, and it's the cost of rental housing, and it's the cost of everything at the grocery store, and it's the cost of a gallon of gas, and it's the cost of everything else. You add it up, and cumulatively, it really does start to add up for folks. And if you haven't had the kind of wage increases that have gone with it, it can really hurt.
And you mentioned gas prices. That's the one that, aren't we? So the average price today, I looked it up this morning, was $3.40 a gallon, right? Now that's higher than it was last year. Aren't we hung up as Americans on the idea that constitutionally, right? The Constitution guarantees us gas at no more than $2 a gallon.
Yeah, I think we are. Maybe we've gotten, it's been so long since there's been any inflation in the economy at all that this is the first time. I saw a story this morning that it's really the first time that anybody in Gen X or the millennial generation has had to deal with inflation. Inflation was really something that the Gen X generation had to deal with back in the Carter and Reagan years, and really since then there hasn't been much. Mm-hmm. And so that's a long time. That's a long time to go, right, without significant price increases. So I think people have gotten used to things just always costing what they always used to cost.
And of course, people on fixed income or people who haven't seen a wage increase, those a dollar here, a dollar there, whatever, does add up, of course, as they do their weekly grocery shopping. So Keith, when you add all of this up, what do you tell people? Should they feel better about the economy than they do? Or for those who don't feel confident about the economy, what do you tell them? Look up. Things are better than they appear.
What I tell people, and I'll just tell you what I even tell my kids, is you have a great moment to go out and have an opportunity to do the kind of thing you want to do. When the labor markets are this tight, think about how fortunate you are that you don't just have to settle for any job that's available. You can be a little bit choosy. You can be a little bit picky. You can maybe even make a little bit more money than you had anticipated doing. And I think that's a positive signal for things. If you have to borrow money, borrowing money to be able to do things like buy a house and other things, it's a good time for people to be able to do that. I think the government is serious about wanting, to continue to stimulate the economy. I think that's a good thing. If we could control prices and keep them in place like that, don't just focus on that. There's a lot of good things that are happening out there too. And hopefully, right, that we are on the other side, of COVID here, and we at least have a way to control it and be able to deal with it. And hopefully the dire warnings that came out about, the new variant over the weekend aren't going to take us completely off stream. But I personally think that the economy is coming back. It's a good time to be a worker looking for a job. and do some things. And I do think, right, that the prices will sort of stabilize themselves over time and do that. That's one person's opinion. But I'm rather bullish on things right now, as opposed to being, completely terrified like I think some people are.
Are there things that the Biden administration, the president himself, should do to get that positive message out that they're not doing?
Yeah, I think they got to talk more about what they're going to do very specifically now that the infrastructure, bill is now the law, and talk very specifically to give people confidence that money's going to be coming into their communities, and tout the things that people are going to see. Very real, tangible things like broadband going into tons of areas and the other kinds of things that people will start to see. And I think they have to talk more, not about the cost of the Build Back Better initiative, not talk about the infighting that's going on, but talk about the real changes in people's lives that will happen if those initiatives are done. The kinds of things that will provide real relief on things like childcare and real relief on other things that people really need in lives. These are contributions that will put more people to work, that will provide more job opportunities for people, that will make people's lives better. At the very base, they got to talk more about what this does, and not about the inner workings of Washington or the Congressional Budget Office is scoring on this. Talk about what this bill will produce for people at the end of the day, because it's really, really good things. And if people understood that better, they would understood that there's good things coming, and that government can really work for people again.
I hope the media would help get that message out too. I find them, as you point out, too focused on the infighting, right, and not on the end result. Well, let me give you a chance to talk about, for example, let's talk about the infrastructure bill, the biggest public investment since President Eisenhower in 1956 with the interstate highway system. I mean, this is going to touch every corner of America, correct?
Every corner of America, and things that people will see and will make their lives better. I mean, that's the thing. This isn't just fixing potholes or providing infrastructure for things that people never see. This is going to create more high-speed rail. This is going to create broadband in every part of the country so that we can bring job opportunities to other parts of the world. This is going to, allow people to pay for childcare. That's the other part. But these are real things that won't just let us build more weapons or conduct better foreign policy or respond to other things. It's real things that will make people's lives better and almost immediately. And of course, it will also deal with this existential threat that we have, which is climate change. And I mean, that won't come into fruition immediately. But Lord, we've got to take care of that problem and make sure that we put some real investment into that. And this will be a down payment on doing some of that work.
And the other side of it, the so-called hard infrastructure, the BIF, right? The so-called soft infrastructure will help workers take advantage of those opportunities, right? To build back better in whatever form it passes.
Help working families be able to take care of their kids, help more people find their way into providing home health care, which will help our aging population. Will allow people to get things like hearing aids for free instead of spending a couple $1,000s on those kinds of things. These are real things that will matter for a lot of people.
If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.